Hi, everyone. All right, let's dive into PHP a little bit. First, I want to get past why we're learning PHP. I get asked that every so often. Some people think PHP is an older type of language and not useful anymore. I don't agree with that at all. I do think it's not as big as it once was, but I think it's out there quite a bit. And I believe a lot of people are still writing a lot of code in PHP, and there was a lot of code in PHP already written and needs to be maintained. PHP was a really big language in regards to open source back in that era where, I guess about 10 years ago, open source everything, free everything. That's still out there, but not as prevalent as it once was. But that's what made PHP probably the number one language to learn about 10 years ago. In today's world, I believe it's used quite a bit still. However, outside of it's used or not, and the job that you may get may use it or not, I think it's a great language to learn the concepts of web-based application programming. For the most part, you have to do everything with this language. So you learn exactly what's going on behind the scenes. For those of you that may have already taken ASP.NET or will take ASP.NET, in Microsoft's world, it does a lot for you. That's great, but if you don't understand what it's doing for you, it's not so great, and it becomes actually confusing and hard to actually understand what to do, when to do it, and so on. Having a good background in good scripting language like PHP, where you got to do it all, helps in that understanding of what Microsoft's actually doing for you. Does that make sense? So I think PHP, if you ever use it again, this course will allow you to set the tone on what a web-based application program is and allow you to move forward with alternate languages that deal with web-based applications. All right, so I want you to feel good about what you're going to be learning as you move forward. I have this site up right now because this is the site we're going to be using for this course. For the most part, it's going to be a site I hope you go to quite a bit in regards to learning PHP. I do not have a book for this course on purpose because I don't feel the books do this language justice. I think it confuses it more than helps it. So I want to teach it in a way that's simplistic yet thorough. And I think this language is simplistic yet thorough. And it doesn't need to be more confusing than what it really is. All right. And so W3 Schools is going to be my choice of tutorials that I'm going to show you and reference quite a bit. There will be times I'll go to other tutorials, and there will be times that I'll probably reference a few books here and there throughout the course to help you with your understanding. I'll probably also provide you from time to time additional resources over and above what we cover to allow you to go and read a different point of view that might help you in your understanding. But all in all, it's a pretty simple language, and the fact that you already have a few languages down in regards to what you've taken already in this curriculum should make it relatively easy to learn. All right, we already went through that it's a web application program. We already went through that it's really based upon an HTML form that you're going to be interfacing with. All right, anyway, so what we're going to do in this particular video is kind of dive right into the code and do some processing from that payroll form that we created in the last video. All right. And to do so, we're going to learn a few things. We're going to learn the syntax, about some variables, some data types, operators, of course, and then if then else type statements, or if else if, I guess I should say, based upon what's there. As you can see, this particular site breaks these things up really nicely, and it also gives you some great examples that you can run right on this page to show you how it actually works, and then you can actually relate to. All right, so sit back for a few minutes. This video is going to be a little bit longer than the last couple, but hopefully we can cover quite a bit of things here and then get you started. All right, so first of all, what is PHP? How do we actually write this? Well, the basic PHP syntax is this. Everything that starts with a PHP, I guess, less than sign, question mark PHP, and everything in between that and the question mark greater than sign is the PHP code. All right. That's where you put your code at, all right, in this case. So let's go look at my example here for you. And as you can see, I have an HTML. So we're going to take PHP code, kind of wrap it in an HTML body, but really what this looks like here is that everything wrapped in this tag, I'm going to refer this to the PHP tag from now on. It's PHP tag here, And the closing PHP tag is actually executable code. It's telling the browser, it's telling the web server, if you will, to execute this as PHP. It's going to interpret it. If you remember that very first video we did in regards to how PHP works, it's going to interpret it. You're going to do your variables into this. You're going to go get your input. You're going to do your calculations. You're going to then actually determine your outputs, all within this PHP code. And also, in a few weeks or so, when we dive into the database portion of this, you'll do all your database calls, all encapsulated within those PHP tags. Anything outside those tags will be treated as HTML, and it will render it as HTML, meaning if I took these tags off and actually ran it, all this code would actually show up on our web page. You don't want that. You don't want that PHP code to show up on your web page. It's going to be the processing behind the scenes. Does that make sense? All right, so everything within those tags, okay, once again, we got an HTML document here, but everything within those tags is going to be PHP and ran, and that literally executed as logical code. Everything outside those tags, as you see down here, name, wage, hours, normal pay, OT pay, and gross, that will all be HTML, and it'll show up back on the browser as it re-renders your web page. All right, so that's kind of how it works. As I told you before, I'm doing a lot of separation. A lot of times what you'll see in the books and so on, we have this payroll to HTML, and we have this piece right here. All of this would be thrown together in one big .php document. I rather teach you separation. I think it's easier to understand. I think it's easier for you to write. I'm a big believer in keeping it simple. You all know that. And I think if you know, let's just have our HTML form in its own document. We'll call that .html. And then all the processing of that document will be over in the .php processing type of file. All right? You'll get the hang of this as you go on. And I think you'll start appreciating it because trust me, trying to do this all in one big document gets really confusing, really fast, and much harder than it needs to be. A little separation here is going to be something you're going to appreciate, and I think you're going to be able to learn this a lot more quickly and easily. All right, with that said, so what's going on with this? So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to walk you through this code real fast and kind of show you what's going on, and then we'll go back and kind of address it piece by piece. What the first thing it's going to do is, if you recall from my payroll HTML, I am going to hit submit. I'm going to populate these three controls, one name txt name, one txt wage, one txt hours. It's going to be submitted, and it's going to go find payroll process.php. Now, based upon how I have this payroll process.php in my action, it's basically relative to the HTML document, meaning it's going to find it in the exact same folder because I don't have any folders in there. If you happen to have this in a different folder on your directory, make sure you preface that. Maybe you have a directory called PHP and you want it to go there from your HTML form. I hope that makes sense. But basically, I'm going to have both of these together in my directory, so thus it's going to be relative and it should be able to find payroll process without issue. I hope you understand that at this point in time. We kind of went through that big time in HTML class. As you'll notice, HTML class comes back with a vengeance here. And I hope you remember quite a few of these things. If you don't, go back and refresh yourself, okay? Or if you have questions, let me know. All right, so we're doing that. So it's basically going to process it. So I'm going to go to this process file, and that's what this is. And really what happens is it sends this to the web server, and then what we're going to do is we're going to declare some variables. This is how we declare variables. We'll talk about that here in a second. We're going to go get our input. This is how we get the input off the form that was just submitted to the browser. I'm sorry, submitted to the web server. We're going to go ahead and declare some more outputs in this case, and we'll initialize them to 0. We're going to do a little bit of processing here using a conditional statement. This should not scare you at all. The syntax, obviously, is a little different than maybe .NET, but if you've taken a Java or JavaScript or C or I don't know what other languages, C#, how this looks is pretty much how those languages look also in regards to the if-then-else type of situation. All right, then finally what we're going to do, we're going to create some tags for our output HTML, and we're going to link in here, if you will, or concatenate in here, if you will. I don't know if it's really concatenation, but add, I guess I would say, the output. And we're going to do that with this word called echo, which actually puts it back out. It's a writing term. All right, so let's walk through this real fast and make sure you kind of understand what's going on. So first things first, let's go back to this piece here. So what's a variable? So a variable is this. We're going to declare a variable in PHP. To do so, you put a $ and then whatever the name of the variable is. What you might notice right off the bat is that we don't have a data type on here. You don't put data types in PHP. This is a loosely, what's the term for it? I gotta make sure I see it's down here. Loosely typed language, that's what it is. It's a loosely typed language, which means you don't provide data types for your variables. The variable takes on the data type based upon the data that's actually put in it. So $txt in this case would be hello world. It would take on the data type of a string. 10.5, the first one take on a data type of an integer, and the second one would take on the data type of a float or a decimal. Does that make sense? So not the most efficient language in the world because, there's efficiencies in telling it exactly what it's doing. So in some cases, based upon how you're coding this, because it's loosely typed, we could end up with some wrong results and so on if we don't pay attention to what we're doing as a programmer. .NET did some wonderful things for us to ensure that we did everything right. This one, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful on how you actually execute your code or write your code, I should say. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Again, it's a loosely typed, no data types in this case, just kind of put it in there. Obviously, the syntax here is $equals, and then everything in PHP ends with a semicolon. Every line that you write ends with a semicolon. Once again, very similar to other languages that are out there with the same type of syntax, if you will. All right. So once again, I'm just going to kind of walk through this. My expectations are as you will read this and make sure you understand what this is actually doing. So I recommend that you go through this piece by piece. I'm going to come back down here and install something. We do have scope in PHP. We won't deal with it initially. But it's the same type of scope that you dealt with in .NET World, okay, where everything outside of a procedure is, we call it class in .NET World, if you remember that, but here it's called global. So everything outside of procedure that's actually declared is a global type of variable, and it's available to every function or procedure within your PHP code. Everything that's defined within a procedure will be local. Now, unlike .NET, where everything is in a procedure, that's not how it works in PHP. Procedures are something we need to create ourselves if we want to. And as you will notice from the example for this week, we have no procedure. It's just going to execute the code from top to bottom. But we could if we wanted to, and of course, we're going to learn how to do that in this course. Okay? All right, cool. So let's come back to our code here. So as you see, what I'm doing here is I create the base. All I don't need to do is a word dim or anything. All I need to do is just name it. And it will actually then allocate space. That's our declaration statement in a way. It's going to allocate the space in memory appropriately to handle the type of data that's being put into it. All right. The one little advanced thing I'm doing right off the bat is I'm diving you right into passing of data. Okay, and there's a lot of different ways of passing data in PHP. You can use what we're going to talk about by pulling off the information from the form. You can pass data via a query string. You can pass data via cookies. I'm trying to think what else. And you can pass data also using global variables or session variables, I should say. Not global variables, but session variables. There's efficiencies in each one of them, and there's inefficiencies in some of them. And we'll talk about that as the course continues. But right now what we're going to do is, because we basically told our program that we have a form here, and we're going to submit it to the server, and we're going to execute payroll process.php. Literally what's happening is we are providing the server with all the information that's in our HTML form. That's this right here, these three controls, one named txt name, wage, and hours. What we can literally do is go get that information. All right. And as long as we name it correctly, meaning if I put in hours with two S's, it wouldn't find that. So thus a zero will probably end up in DEC hours. It won't error out. It just won't, nothing will show up. Either a, probably in this case, it'll probably be a space or nothing, and you'll get all confused. So you're going to make sure you name your information, what am I going to say, your controls here in this spot the exact same names you gave it in your form over here. Hope that makes sense is what I'm saying. So to get the information off that form, what you do is use this $_post. There it is. $_post says go to the form and find txt name as the control, and whatever is in there, stick that into the variable. That's what this line right here is saying. Same thing for this line and this line. So once these three execute, because we called it and it actually came in and it's executing top down, the information will come off the form and now be in those variables. These are some output variables. These output variables, I'm going ahead and initializing with a 0. And as you notice, every line ends with a semicolon. All right, let's keep going here a little bit. And then basically what I'm going to do is do a little bit of processing. And I'm doing that with a if-else type structure. All right. And as you notice, we have the parenthesis here that represents the then, if you will, in this case, and it ends with the parenthesis here. And then this represents the else. And you need to encapsulate both the then side and the else side within those parentheses. Okay, and that's how it works. It has to be a one-to-one relationship. For every open left parenthesis, there has to be a closing right parenthesis, or it will not work and probably won't execute, or you'll get a syntax error once you get into that. Make sense? Hopefully you've seen that before in other languages. Maybe you haven't. Maybe this is new. Kind of get used to that syntax as you go through it. If we go back to this, if you go to the if-else piece, it'll show you how to write these conditional statements. The one we're going to deal with this week is the simple if statement, all right, and maybe if-else statement that's actually in there. So that's this one and this one. The if-else if, we'll get to that a little bit later on, and the switch statement, which is used in C, C++, Java, and so on, is the same as the case, select case from .NET world, if you remember that, VB.NET. All right? So we'll get to those maybe a little bit later on in the course as you go through it, but we're just going to stick with the simplicity of our conditional statements. So wow, look at this. We're going through this pretty fast. So there's our variables. There's our data types. We already talked about it, okay? Again, the data types in regards to what it can actually take on. It can take on any of these, but based upon what you actually put into them. Once again, this is a loosely typed language, so we don't declare them as this. It just takes on whatever you give it. And it can take on a string, an integer, a float, a boolean, an array, which we'll talk about here, an object, and we actually will do with objects in this course, okay? Null and resource, not so much, I don't think, but for the most part, I guess null, you just wouldn't put anything in there. Resource, I'm not quite sure what that is, to be honest with you. I might have to look at that and talk about that a little bit later on in future videos. But string, integer, float, boolean, array, and then object, when we get an object-oriented, should all be somewhat familiar to you at this point in time. All right, cool. So we're doing pretty good. Syntax, variables, data types, obviously strings and constants you can look at yourself. The operators, arithmetic operators, assignment operators, these are very similar to what you already know. All right, we can do our addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, modulus. Has anybody ever done modulus before? Modulus basically takes two numbers and gives you the remainder. It does a division and provides a remainder, something you may want to think about using one day. I don't know, it doesn't come up very often, and the use of it doesn't come up very often, but something that's there that you should have in the back of your head. Exponents, oh God, I don't know, you know, this word right there, whatever that is. And then if we went to the assignment operators, in this case, x equals y is the same as this. X plus equals y is the same as x equals x plus y. That's that little short thing. We did that a little bit in .NET, I'm sure. So x plus equals y is the same as doing more of an accumulation type addition along with subtraction and those types of pieces. Comparison operators, a little bit different than what you would have in .NET world. If you're comparing two things and you want to say, are they equal, you got to use equal, equal. Okay? Identical, I never really used identical before. Let's see, it returns true if X is equal to Y and they are both the same type. Okay. All right, whatever. And then not equal and so on. So take a look at these and see how you actually write the operators for this language. These are very similar to Java, C, C++, C Sharp, and so on. Not the same as VB.NET, but once again, it shouldn't be that difficult to understand what it's doing. In VB.NET, we just said if X equals Y. In this language, we would say if X equals Y. Make sense? All right, cool. Good, good, good. Incrementing and decrementing, you can read that, please. Okay, and how you go about doing that. And then the logical operators, and, or, and so on. We'll just use and or for the most part. You can use XOR and. We'll get into these a little bit, how to write compound conditions as the course goes on. Okay? Anyway, read over operators. You should know what they are, but you just need to know how this language deals with them. Okay, cool. Let's go back to our code once again. So we said in this case, if DEC hours is greater than 40, so we wouldn't got DEC hours, and if it is, we're going to go ahead and do some calculations based upon determining overtime. That's what this particular code did. I think we've probably done this before in other languages that you have taken and other courses you have taken, so it shouldn't be anything out of this world to you. So in this case, if it's they did have overtime hours, that we would figure out the overtime costs and we would figure out the gross accordingly. So we figure out the normal and overtime. In this case, we're figuring out the normal. There is no overtime because it fell to the else, and then we end up with our gross. Our goal then is to go ahead and put this out as our output. Since it's an HTML document, I close my PHP bracket, and I'm going to put this here. Now notice what I'm doing. I'm opening back up another PHP bracket. And we're saying go ahead and include right after the HTML name, bolded name, go ahead and include txt name. This is basically putting out that name. Does that make sense? Echo does that. So let's go back real fast and learn about echo. Okay. Echo and print are more or less the same. They are both used to output data to a screen. The small differences are echo has no return value, while print has a return value of 1, so it can be used in an expression. So you're going to use echo more than anything. And so the echo statement can be used with or without parentheses. So you can do it this way. In this case, echo PHP is fun, echo hello world, echo all these types of things. If I run this example, you can see how that actually works. So echo is just basically saying, put out that data onto the HTML screen. That's what it's saying, okay, in a nutshell. So going back to our code, so please read through that. So going back to our code, we're echoing the name that was our input. We're echoing the wage and the hours that were input. And then we're echoing the actual output, which was the normal that we derived from our code, the same thing from our overtime we derived from our code, and finally our gross. Notice once again the colons after every PHP statement, okay? And then look what we did. We just kind of got out of PHP and then we put a break in there to go to the next line, right? That's what the VR is for. And that's how it actually works. We ended our HTML, and we just wrote our very first, pretty sophisticated, if you will, PHP code. All right. If you took both these files, your payroll HTML and your payroll process, and you stuck them into a folder, maybe that you need to do for iXamp, and actually executed them, you will see how they actually run. Your job then is to do your assignments and do them the exact same way. Make sure your HTML document of your form is in the exact same location as your payroll, and kind of follow along exactly how I did it, and you should be fine. All right? If you have questions, of course, let your instructor know immediately, and I think you should be good to go with this case. All right? This is our our content right now in week 3. This is where we're at. I provided you some web sources in regards to the schools. Here's the HTML form information. Here's a little bit of information about PHP. This is from the first video, and then this is the actual example we went through. Based upon that, you should be able to follow along with your assignments and with my examples and get this thing working. All right, good luck to you.